What extra expenses do you face when you buy a property in Northern Cyprus? Before we go through the list, let me show you a very clear example of how a bargain on paper becomes a completely normal or even bad deal after you count all the extra costs. For example, let's say you find a bargain offer in the market, a studio in one of the most luxurious locations, which is a Centape, for a price of £70,000. You know, it's a regular studio, 35 square meters in size, in a complex with a full spectrum of facilities such as restaurant, gyms, saunas, landscape design, playgrounds, so forth, and only 300 meters to the seafront. So you think the developer that's building the project has an outstanding reputation. It's a resale at a bargain price of 70,000 because in off-plan market, on sale from the developers, the price would not go below 120,000. So you think it's a perfect deal, but let's have a look at the extra costs that can be hidden within the purchase price of that studio. The apartment in question is being sold not by the developer, but by the private owner, meaning that you will have to be paying a reassignment fee to the developer to reassign a contract into your name as a new buyer. And in this case scenario, the reassignment fee would be £5,000. And as well as that, my dear friends, the developer, to make this resale possible, charges several mandatory payments. VAT, 5%, which is equivalent to £3,500. Trafo fee, which is utility connection, another £5,000. A generator fee, because the complex has a generator system in case your lights go off. It's another £1,500. And taxes on contract registration from the cadastral value, but in this case scenario, we'll take as £70,000 as a benchmark. 6.5% of the taxes would be equivalent to £4,500. Then we have furniture and appliances, roughly about £6,000, a lawyer fee of £2,500, and application to the Council of Ministers, which grants you the permission to transfer the title deed into your name later. The application costs you £500. There is also connection of water and electricity meters plus deposits, roughly would cost you about £750, and the final payment on a title deed transfer in a couple of years, which amounts to roughly about £2,100. And this, my dear friends, is over than 31% more than the advertised price. But to be fair, even with this extra cost, the apartment is still about 40% cheaper than buying the same thing directly from the developer today. But let's say there is another studio for sale in the same complex but with different views, right? And the price of that studio is £83,000. But this studio, my dear friends, already includes furniture and appliances, and the owner has already received the keys, meaning that he has already paid the VAT of 5%, Trafo and the generator fee. So if we add to £83,000 the reassignment cost, that is mandatory, which is £5,000, taxes on registration, again mandatory fee, which is £4,500, and a lawyer fee of £2,500, the total of the extra costs will come up to roughly about £12,000. So altogether, my dear friends, with the purchase price, we get about £95,000. Which is £6,000 cheaper than the previous cheaper option for 70k on the website. But the second option gets much fewer inquiries, simply because the price on the website looks higher. So I hope now you see, whether you buy it from a developer or on the resale market, you must always ask, what are all extra costs for this property? Now let's break down all the costs, and I will start with VAT. Okay, in Northern Cyprus, VAT on property is 5%, and it is paid by the buyer directly to the developer. Usually it is paid either on the key delivery, either once you get your permission to transfer the title deed into your name. And I'll remind you that you pay directly to the developer, and the developer passes it on to the government, okay, on your behalf. Rarely, but developers do ask to pay VAT during the construction period while you're paying your payment plan. Can you save on VAT? Well, sometimes people split the contract into two parts. For example, if you buy a property that costs you £200,000, the developer will write two contracts. First contract will cover £100,000, which is registered at the land registry, and it would be the price that you pay your taxes on. And the second contract for another 100,000 would be for a kitchen, bathroom tiles, windows, anything that is not linked to the actual property itself and the land that property is standing on. In that case, 5% VAT is usually calculated only from the registered part of the contract, which is £100,000 instead of £200,000. Well, and of course, developers like this theme too because they pay their own taxes on a lower registered amount of the contract. But there are risks involved. Let's say if the project is not finished and you go to court, you can usually claim only the sum that is in a registered contract, not the second part of the contract, which is for furniture, finishing, or any extras. And if your registered contract is written in Turkish lira or with an extremely low price, then in 2-3 years, the land registry will reevaluate your property at a much higher value when you sell or transfer the title deed onto your name. And let me give you an example. Let's say you pay VAT on £100,000 to the developer. In 3 years' time, land registry values your property at £150,000, okay? The developer in this case can say, well, we will pay VAT only on £100,000 as stated in the registered contract. The difference from £100,000 to £150,000, that is your, as a buyer's problem, okay? And you'll have to deal with it yourself and cover the extra cost. So the conclusions are, do not heavily underdeclare the value in a contract. And do not underdeclare if you are not fully confident in the developer or if the project is at a very early stage. If the property is completed, on the other hand, with a separate title deed and you are buying it cheap, then small difference in VAT later are usually acceptable because the general discount often compensates for everything. Now let's talk about Trafo, or as we call it, utility fee, because this is a very important extra cost. Trafo is payment for connecting the complex to main utilities such as electricity and water. And please do not confuse it with connecting individual meters to your own apartment later. The name can be different. We can call it Trafo fee or transformer fee or even utility fee, okay? But in practice, it is the same thing. Usually, it is anywhere from £1,500 to £3,500. For luxury apartment villas and townhouses can be up to £5,000. However, we have seen absurd situations where people were asked for £10,000 or £15,000 Trafo fee, which is basically abuse. Ideally, this fee should be clearly written in your purchase contract with exact amount that needs to be paid. Now let's talk about generator fee, which is a separate payment in some complexes that do have generators for the use of the residents, for communal facilities as well as the private homes. Personally, I like it when the generator is included in the price and nothing extra is charged, but many developers now put it as a separate line in the contract. You'd ask, is the generator useful? Well, yes, very, particularly in Northern Cyprus, because here electricity is often turned off during the day for technical work. Sometimes it can be anywhere from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on a working day. And if you work online remotely from home, this can actually completely kill your working routine. So paying once for a generator in a good complex can really improve your comfort and rental potential. Another cost that can be involved is the air conditioning fee, or as we call it, VRF system fee. More and more often, we see separate payments for air conditioning system, especially in high-rise hotel type of complexes. Developers install VRF systems and then charge buyers separately for them. If construction is long, the contract sometimes says only buyers must pay for air conditioning system later without any numbers. I do personally recommend insisting on a maximum limit in the contract. For example, there will be a separate payment for air conditioning, but not more than £3,500. Otherwise, 3-4 years later, the developer can suddenly ask for 10k, 15k for air conditioning, and you will have nothing to object with. Another cost that might arise on a key delivery is the deposit for the maintenance of your complex when you are opening an account with the management company. You see, many buyers don't live in Northern Cyprus full-time. Some don't even come here for years. Some rent their properties out, but they don't physically live in here, okay? And at the same time, in the complex, pool must be cleaned, gardens must be maintained, and communal areas need to be looked after. So if the owner don't pay maintenance fee, the complex still has running costs. So today, many developers take an advance deposit of anywhere from £500 to £1,500. depending, of course, on the complex and the annual maintenance cost. So if the owner doesn't pay the maintenance fee, the management company can actually take the money from this deposit. Now let's move on to the reassignment fee, the one that scares people the most on the resale market today. So what is the reassignment fee? Reassignment fee, my dear friends, is the payment to the developer for canceling the old contract with the seller and assigning a new contract with the new buyer. So for the government, this looks exactly like a new purchase, as long as the title deed, which is Kochan, is still on the name of the developer. Only the developer can sign the purchase contract. On the other hand, if the owner, which is the seller, already has the title deed on their name, there is no reassignment fee at all because, you don't have to get the developer involved since the title deed has been transferred already. So that's why today it is much safer to buy properties with a separate individual title deed that's already been issued into the owner's name and transferred. So if the title deeds are still not divided in a complex, basically you have to pay the reassignment fee when you buy. And then your future buyer, if you decide to sell, will have to pay reassignment fee when you sell. So the developer earns several times on the same property just because they hold the title deed and they have to be the one signing the sale agreement. And there is also a good tool now, a floor servitude titles, which is Kart İrtifak Koçan. They allow developers to divide title deeds during construction, which is a big plus for buyers. So how much is the reassignment fee? Good level would be anywhere from £1,500 to £3,000. That's considered to be acceptable. This amount can be split between the seller and the buyer, and it doesn't kill the deal. Quite often, we started seeing reassignment costs up to £5,000, which is still acceptable for bigger units such as 1+1 and 2+1, villas and townhouses. The problem level when the reassignment cost climbs all the way up to £10,000 or £15,000 or more. We've seen cases on the market in the last year where a lady had to pay £20,000 reassignment fee for a small studio, and that was almost 40% of the entire property price. But the developer refused to reduce it and said, it's either you pay this or you simply cannot sell. The good news is that there are many serious long-term developers in Northern Cyprus who keep reassignments reasonable and understand that their future reputation and future sales are more important than one extra payment today. However, there are also developers who are famous for very high reassignment fees today. And if you fall in love with a project from such a company, you must factor this in and decide if the property is still worth it to you personally. Now let's touch base on the lawyer's fees. In Northern Cyprus, you will need a licensed lawyer for a safe purchase, both for primary and secondary markets. The normal price range would be anywhere from £2,000 to £3,000, and lawyers normally look at each other's prices, so they tend to stay in this particular range. If you choose a lawyer in Nicosia, the price might be a little bit lower because those lawyers mainly work with the local market and Turkish market rather than foreign investors, with regards to properties in Kyrenia, Centerville, Long Beach. But in Nicosia, there can be less service in terms of the English, or any other foreign language that you would prefer. So how to choose a lawyer? Well, first of all, you need to decide whether you want a lawyer who speaks your own native language, such as Russian, German, Polish maybe. If so, then your choice would be a lot smaller. Then you need to talk to 2 or 3 different lawyers, go to the meetings, listen to how they explain things, so forth, and choose the one who gives you the most trust and looks professional and organized. Let me speak about the state taxes once more. We have 2 main government taxes that you pay when you purchase a property in Northern Cyprus. The first tax is a contract registration tax, which amounts to 6% and is paid at the contract registration at land registry. Then you pay 0.5% at the same day on the same spot stamp duty tax. The second tax would be a title transfer tax when you get the permission to transfer the title into your name, and it amounts to 3% on the cadastral value at the moment of the title deed transfer, which happens a year or 2 from the purchase date. If you decided to buy a second property, your tax numbers switch. Basically, at the contract registration, you pay instead of 6, you pay 3% plus 0.5 stamp duty tax. And on a title deed transfer, you pay 6% on the cadastral value that happens a year or 2 after the purchase has been done. There are also 2 important points to consider. First of all, you cannot pay tax from a value lower than the minimal cadastral value on your property. And that value is valid for only 1 month, and you have to order it prior you pay your taxes. And also, you must register your contract on time within 21 days of signing, because late registration leads to a penalty. We've seen cases where many people after the new law in 2024 changed the dates in their contracts to avoid paying 1% extra penalty on a late registration. So make sure you register the contracts on time. Also remember, 3% on the title deed transfer is paid from either cadastral value, if it's higher, or the contract price, if it's higher than the cadastral value. And don't forget, some developers leave extra payments specifically for the moment of the title transfer, including VAT if it's not been paid earlier. So let's summarize all extra payments. Today, we have discussed the most common extra costs when buying property in Northern Cyprus, and they are VAT 5%, Trafo, which is utility connection, generator fee, air conditioning or VRF system payments, deposit for maintenance, reassignment costs, lawyer's fee, of course, state taxes, which 6.5% and 3%, application of consuls of ministers, furniture and appliances, connecting meters, and of course, final title transfer costs. But not everything is this bad. This video does not mean you will definitely face all of those extra expenses. There are many good developers who include most extra cost in the property price and offer you a clear, understandable contracts. On the secondary market, usually many extra costs are already covered by the first initial owner, and you mainly have only taxes on contract registration, on title deed transfer, lawyer fee, and of course reassignment cost if the title deed is still not on the owner's name but rather on the developer's name. Most other costs can be already covered by the seller, or at least clearly calculated in advance so you know what you will have to be dealing with. Before I let you all go, my dear friends, there are certain things you need to watch out for. Let's say a developer splits the contract into 2 parts to reduce your taxes payable, but takes the VAT from the full amount of the purchase price, even though the developer only declares half of the amount to the government. This would be a very bad sign. Usually, such a developer will also charge a high trafo, ask for a high reassignment fee later in case you decide to resell your property, and try to get extra money at every step along the way. So pay attention to such signals. A lot of you might be wondering why prices on websites are so misleading and why agents do not just include the full price with all the extra costs already included to show the full picture to the buyers. The answer would be very simple, my dear friends. It's marketing. Most buyers first compare properties by the number they see on the website. If we add all extra costs into that number, the property will look too expensive and many people will not even click on it. Those potential buyers will never contact the agents to learn that even with extra costs, it might be still a very good deal. So a good solution here would be is to keep the main price visible, but clearly list all extra expenses in the description or comments. This is what I consider good practice for agents and developers. My dear friends, the most important things in a good property deal in Northern Cyprus are honesty, transparency, and professionalism of all sides. And the buyer also has their own kind of professionalism, and I would call it being prepared, understanding the purchase process, knowing about extra costs that might be involved, and knowing how to ask the right questions, because a buyer like that is very hard to mislead. And this is exactly the goal of my channel, to help as many of you as possible become strong, informed buyers who can confidently buy property in Northern Cyprus without illusion and without surprises. So if this video was useful, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and write your questions and real stories in the comments below, because I always read them. And of course, I always try to answer everything. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.